Okay, I decided to do my presentation on Kingsley Plantation. We'll start with the plantation house. Zephaniah Kingsley bought and moved to this plantation on Fort George Island in 1814, along with his wife, Anna Kingsley. Anna was actually a West African slave who was only 13 years old at the time when she was bought by Kingsley. Later, they had children together, and soon she was given the responsibilities of the plantation home. What I thought was interesting was Kingsley allowed Anna to keep some of her West African heritage alive. So while she would live in the plantation home with him, she would actually have her own quarters to the house, and she would basically live separately than Kingsley. And as we go further through more of the plantation, we can see how she kept some of her heritage alive as well through there. Okay, the housing for the slaves were basically made out of tabby, which was a material of oyster shells, sand, and water. They were typically pretty small but sturdy at the time, and many slaves occupied these houses until the 1900s. From looking at these houses, you can see that they may be a little bit different than any other slave homes that you may have visited from other sites. But while building these, they liked to keep a fireplace, which was used for warmth, and a place to cook. A lot of the families tried to keep their own African heritage alive while living in these quarters as well. So animal sacrifices were still practiced in these homes, usually through chicken bones, unbroken eggs, glass beads, and pieces of iron were used and buried around the houses. When looking at these houses on the plantation, you can see that they're in a semicircle formation, and that's because of the West African heritage that Anna liked to keep alive throughout the plantation. As we look through the slave labor on Kingsley Plantation, we can see that it was mostly run by the task system, and the task system is basically each slave was assigned a certain amount of work for the day, and after they would complete the task, they were allowed to do basically whatever they choose to do with their free time. Most of the stuff that was grown on this plantation was Sea Island cotton, which was the main cash crop. But as you can see in this picture above, that there might have also been indigo production that was also used on the plantation. As you can imagine, the temperatures in Florida get increasingly hot. So for these people, trying to keep cool during hot points of the day and warm during cold parts of the night was very crucial. So the fireplaces, as I explained earlier, were probably very helpful towards them, and also their front porches with their coverings for a little shade. What I found to be most interesting about this whole plantation was the grape tree, which, as you're searching through most of like the Kingsley Plantation websites and stuff, it doesn't really mention much of this grape tree. But Anna liked to keep her West African heritage alive, so when most of the slaves would die, she would bury them in a circle around this tree to basically give them basically a proper burial as to what her heritage would say. I personally think they should remove the road from where it is now so that it's not used to go over these graves, but I'm sure construction would take a long time for that to happen. I I think that Kingsley Plantation is very important to Florida history because it shows how involved Florida was to the history of slavery. Because when you look through history books and things like that, they don't really mention Florida as being high in slavery, but we all know that everywhere was high in slavery at that period of time, mostly like Georgia and South Carolina and others like that. But keeping like the preservation of Kingsley Plantation alive shows the stories of those slaves and what they went through artifacts and drawings and things like that. It's always important to keep those things alive, like the tours and the workshops that are put on at Kingsley Plantation. I think that Kingsley Plantation also shows a different side to plantation owners, where Kingsley himself married a slave. Granted, she was very young at the time, but it also shows a different type of relationship that would go on through this plantation. Kingsley's story alone was also very different because at the end of the day, Anna was granted the plantation and most of their will from Kingsley's actual family, so it just shows how times were beginning to change and the importance of that. Okay, well that completes my presentation. Thank you, Professor, for a good semester. It was very interesting.